The paleontologist's hand trembled as he brushed the final layer of sediment from the fossilized jaw. 23 serrated teeth, each the length of a human finger, curved inward like prison bars designed by evolution itself. Dr. Marcus Webb had unearthed hundreds of specimens in his 30-year career, but nothing prepared him for what the computer simulation would reveal 48 hours later. When the biomechanics team fed the skull measurements into their analysis software, the numbers made everyone in the lab go silent. Bite force, 11,000 pounds per square inch. For context, a modern saltwater crocodile, the living animal, with the strongest bite on Earth today, maxes out at 3,700. This creature could have crushed a human ribcage like a soda can, punctured through skull bone as easily as biting into an apple, and severed a femur in a single snap. But the truly horrifying part wasn't just the power, it was the speed. Muscle attachment points on the fossil showed this predator could open and close its jaws in less than 1/10 of a second. Faster than human reaction time. You wouldn't even see it coming. The last thing you'd process would be the rush of air as those jaws accelerated toward you, and then nothing but darkness and the wet sound of your own body giving way. If you're ready to face the prehistoric nightmares that could have ended you before you even screamed, smash that like button and subscribe so you never miss what hunted next. 66 million years ago, the asteroid that ended the dinosaurs did humanity a favor we'll never fully appreciate. It wiped out creatures so lethally designed that modern predators look like house cats by comparison. We talk about lions and bears and sharks with respect, even fear. But those animals evolved in a world where mammals had already won. They never had to compete with the true apex killers, the monsters that ruled when Earth was a fundamentally more violent place. The prehistoric world wasn't just dangerous because animals were bigger. It was dangerous because evolution had more time to perfect the art of killing. And it did so with a creativity that borders on malicious. When we examine the fossil record with modern forensic techniques, CT scans, bite mark analysis, isotope testing, we're not just finding big animals, we're finding murder machines, species whose entire biological purpose was to end other life as efficiently as physics would allow. The evidence isn't just in museums, it's written in the rocks themselves, in fossilized bite marks that show predation in progress, in the healed wounds on prey species that tell us some victims survived long enough for bone to regrow around the damage. It's in the stomach contents of remarkably preserved specimens, showing us exactly what they ate and how often, and increasingly, it's in computer models that can resurrect these animals digitally, letting us watch them hunt in simulated environments, calculating every variable from muscle tension to tooth penetration depth. What these models reveal is genuinely disturbing. Many prehistoric predators could have killed an adult human in under 5 seconds, and not through prolonged attack but through single, catastrophic trauma events that would have caused near-instant death or immediate incapacitation followed by consumption while still technically alive. Let's start with something that sounds almost manageable, but would have been your worst nightmare if you'd encountered it. Smilodon fatalis, the saber-toothed cat, went extinct roughly 10,000 years ago, recent enough that early humans definitely knew these animals, definitely feared them, and definitely ended up inside them on more than one occasion. We have cave paintings that might depict them. We have Smilodon bones with human-made tool marks, suggesting our ancestors tried to hunt them. And we have something more disturbing. Human remains from the same tar pit deposits in Los Angeles where hundreds of Smilodon specimens have been found. Bones showing carnivore tooth marks consistent with big cat predation. Those 7-inch canines weren't just for show. Biomechanical analysis shows Smilodon had relatively weak jaw muscles compared to modern lions, but it didn't need crushing force. Those teeth were precision instruments. The cat would use its incredibly powerful neck and shoulder muscles to drive those sabers down into the throat or skull of prey, cutting through soft tissue to sever the carotid artery, jugular vein or spinal cord. Death would come from catastrophic blood loss or instant neural shutdown. For a human victim, the attack would last perhaps 3 seconds. You'd feel the impact, the weight of 300 pounds of muscle slamming you to the ground, and then the cold penetration as those teeth punched through your neck. You might have 5 or 6 seconds of consciousness as your blood pressure dropped to nothing, just long enough to feel the cat's breath on your face and understand what was happening. But Smilodon was a scalpel. Other predators were sledgehammers. Andrewsarchus mongoliensis, known only from a single massive skull found in Mongolia in 1923, was likely the largest terrestrial mammalian carnivore ever to exist. That skull measures 33 inches long and 20 inches wide. Scale that up to a full body using comparative anatomy with related species, and you get an animal somewhere between a grizzly bear and a small car, possibly weighing 1,800 pounds, with jaws that could generate bone-crushing bite forces. The teeth show it was a hypercarnivore, meaning over 70% of its diet was meat, and the wear patterns suggest it regularly bit through bone to access marrow. Now imagine that hunting strategy applied to a human body. A single bite to the torso would collapse lungs, rupture the heart, shatter the spinal column. You wouldn't be killed so much as destroyed, your structural integrity as an organism simply ending in one compressive instant. The fossil record shows Andrewsarchus lived in coastal environments, ambush hunting in areas where prey came to drink. You'd never see it coming until it was already closing its jaws around your midsection, and by then your last thought would be overwhelmed by the sensation of your own ribs splintering inward. Then there's Megalania, the giant monitor lizard of Pleistocene Australia, which died out only about 50,000 years ago. This means Aboriginal Australians almost certainly encountered them, and oral traditions in some indigenous communities describe enormous reptiles that match Megalania's profile. Modern science has confirmed this wasn't just legend. Megalania stretched up to 23 feet long and weighed close to a ton, but size wasn't its most terrifying feature. In 2009, researchers discovered that Megalania possessed venom glands similar to those in modern Komodo dragons but proportionally much larger. The venom contained anticoagulants that prevented blood clotting, vasodilators that caused blood pressure to drop, and compounds that induced shock. A bite from Megalania wouldn't just wound you, it would turn your own cardiovascular system into a weapon against you. The teeth would tear tissue, the venom would prevent healing, and you'd bleed out internally and externally while going into hypovolemic shock. Victims would remain conscious for minutes, fully aware as their body shut down piece by piece, vision tunneling, extremities going cold, the taste of copper flooding their mouth as blood pooled in their throat. The Aboriginal stories don't describe quick deaths. They describe people walking for hours after being bitten, slowly weakening and finally collapsing as the venom completed its work. But we're just getting started with the terrestrial hunters. The real nightmares were still evolving in directions that would make these predators look almost merciful by comparison. If you're ready to face the prehistoric nightmares that could have ended you before you even screamed, smash that like button and subscribe so you never miss what hunted next. The thing about prehistoric predators is that evolution didn't design them for quick kills out of mercy. It designed them for efficiency, for caloric return on energy investment, for survival in ecosystems where hesitation meant starvation, and sometimes that efficiency involved keeping prey alive as long as possible while consuming them, because fresh meat spoils slower when it's still attached to a living circulatory system. The fossil evidence for this kind of predation is chilling. We find bones with bite marks that healed partially before the animal died, suggesting repeated attacks. We find tooth-racked skulls where the predator was clearly testing for weak points. We find articulated skeletons with missing pieces, the victim apparently escaping one encounter only to be caught later. This wasn't clean killing, this was prolonged horror. Dunkleosteus terrelli ruled the oceans 370 million years ago, and if you'd been transported back in time and dropped into those seas, your death would have been mathematically inevitable. This armored fish grew up to 30 feet long and weighed for tons, but the armor is what makes it truly alien. Its head and thorax were encased in articulated bone plates that functioned like a knight's armor, making it nearly invulnerable to attack. But the front of its face was something out of a nightmare. Instead of teeth, Dunkleosteus had bony protrusions that formed self-sharpening blades. As the upper and lower jaws moved, these edges scraped against each other, maintaining razor sharpness throughout the animal's life. Bite force estimates range from 6,500 to 11,000 pounds per square inch, delivered through jaws that could snap shut in 1/50th of a second. That's faster than a rattlesnake strike, faster than you can blink. Computer models show that Dunkleosteus created a suction effect when opening its jaws, pulling prey into its mouth even as it lunged forward. If you were in the water and it targeted you, you'd feel yourself yanked forward and then the guillotine slam of those jaw blades meeting through your body. The bite would sever you completely, probably at the waist or torso. You'd have maybe 5 seconds of consciousness as a bisected human being, watching your legs drift away in a cloud of blood before shock and oxygen deprivation shut down your brain. Fossilized Dunkleosteus vomitius, we've found this shows partially digested chunks of other armored fish, proving it could bite through bone plate several inches thick. Your skeleton would have been nothing. But at least Dunkleosteus lived in the ocean, a place you might reasonably avoid. Other killers dominated environments that proto-humans and early mammals had no choice but to inhabit. Titanoboa cerrejonensis, discovered in Colombian coal mines in 2009, was a snake that makes every living serpent look like a garden worm. 48 feet long, 2,500 pounds, as thick around as a human torso at its widest point. It lived 58 million years ago in a world where average temperatures were significantly warmer than today, allowing cold-blooded reptiles to reach sizes that would be impossible now. Snakes kill through constriction or venom, but Titanoboa was pure constrictor, and the physics of that hunting method scale up in terrifying ways. Modern anacondas, maxing out around 30 feet and 550 pounds, can exert about 90 pounds per square inch of constriction pressure. Scale that up proportionally to Titanoboa's mass, and you're looking at pressures exceeding 400 pounds per square inch. That's enough to stop blood flow instantly, collapse the trachea, and begin breaking ribs on the first squeeze. But constriction isn't a single squeeze, it's progressive compression. Every time you exhale, the snake tightens, never loosening, never giving you the chance to fully inhale again. Death comes from suffocation or circulatory collapse, but consciousness persists for up to 60 seconds. Victims report from modern anaconda survivors. Since we can't interview Titanoboa victims, a sense of being crushed into a smaller and smaller space, the feeling of their own bones bending and then cracking, the absolute inability to draw a breath no matter how desperately their body tries. Your vision would darken at the edges as your brain was starved of oxygen. But you'd feel everything until the very end, wrapped in living muscle that treated you like a tube of toothpaste being emptied. Then we have the raptors. And here's where paleontology meets forensic pathology in disturbing ways. Utahraptor ostrommaysi was the largest dromaeosaur we've ever found, weighing up to 1,000 pounds and stretching 20 feet from snout to tail. The famous velociraptor from Jurassic Park was actually modeled on Utahraptor, but the movie version was toned down for audiences. The real animal was worse. Each foot had a sickle-shaped claw measuring 9 to 15 inches long, curved like a can opener and kept off the ground when walking to maintain sharpness. These weren't stabbing weapons. They were disemboweling tools. Modern cassowaries, which have similar but much smaller claws, kill by jumping and slashing downward, opening the abdomen in a single strike. Utahraptor would have hunted the same way, but with claws large enough to open a human torso from sternum to pelvis in one motion. We've found fossilized trackways showing these animals hunted in packs, coordinating attacks on prey much larger than themselves. For a human victim, the attack would be multi-directional chaos. One raptor would leap onto your back, using its wing claws to grip while kicking downward, the sickle claw punching through abdominal muscle and pulling outward, spilling intestines onto the ground. You'd still be conscious. That's the horror of disembowelment. It doesn't kill quickly. You'd be aware of the weight on your back, the wet heat of your own insides, suddenly outside, and then the other pack members arriving to feed while your heart was still beating. Fossil evidence from Deinonychus, a smaller relative, shows they engaged in pack-feeding behavior where multiple animals bit and tore at carcasses simultaneously. You wouldn't be killed and then eaten. You'd be eaten into death, awareness flickering out only when blood loss or shock finally granted you unconsciousness. And yet, as horrifying as these creatures were, they were still animals operating within biological limits. They killed to eat, attacked when hungry or threatened, and could theoretically be avoided with the right precautions. But the fossil record holds something else entirely. Predators so large and so powerful that they transcended the normal rules of predation and became more like natural disasters with teeth. There's a point where size stops being an advantage and becomes an inevitability, where a predator is so massive that everything smaller than itself is simply food. No strategy required, no hunt necessary. These weren't animals that stalked or ambushed. They were biological tsunamis that moved through environments and consumed everything in their path. The evidence for this kind of predation is written in mass death assemblages. Fossil sites where dozens of prey animals died simultaneously, their bones bearing identical bite marks from a single predator that killed more than it could possibly eat, killing because it could, because nothing could stop it. Sarcosuchus imperator, the super-patrode African river systems 110 million years ago and made modern crocodiles look like pets, 40 feet long, 8 tons, with a skull alone measuring 6 feet from snout to back of the head. But the skull measurements tell only part of the story. In 2002, paleontologist Paul Sereno's team found something that changed our understanding of how this animal killed. The teeth weren't conical like modern crocs designed for gripping. They were laterally compressed, blade-like, designed for cutting, and there were over 100 of them, interlocking when the jaws closed to form a biological trap that nothing could escape once triggered. Bite force estimates for Sarcosuchus exceed 18,000 pounds per square inch, roughly twice that of a great white shark. But crocodilians don't just bite, they death roll, spinning their entire body while gripping prey to tear off chunks of flesh. When Sarcosuchus grabbed a victim, it wasn't trying to drown them or crush them. It was trying to rip them into manageable pieces. A human caught in those jaws would experience complete dismemberment. The initial bite would probably take an arm or leg cleanly off the teeth, meeting through bone with no resistance. The death roll would begin immediately, centrifugal force tearing tissue that the teeth hadn't quite severed through. You'd be conscious for all of it, watching your own limbs separate from your body in the muddy water. The pain beyond description because your nervous system never evolved to process that level of catastrophic damage all at once. Victims would bleed out in under 2 minutes, but those would be the longest 2 minutes conceivable. Every second stretched into eternity by adrenaline and the impossibility of what was happening. But Sarcosuchus lived in water, an environment where ambush was possible and prey might not see the attack coming. Other predators had no such advantage. They hunted in open terrain where visibility was unlimited, and they succeeded anyway because their prey couldn't run, couldn't hide, couldn't do anything but die. Giganotosaurus carolinii was slightly larger than Tyrannosaurus rex and possibly more terrifying because of how it killed. T-Rex was a butcher biting down and holding on, using raw power to subdue prey. Giganotosaurus was a slasher. Its teeth were thinner, blade-like, designed to slice through flesh and cause catastrophic bleeding rather than structural damage. Pack hunting behavior is suspected based on multiple specimens found in close proximity. suggesting coordinated attacks on massive sauropods. The hunting strategy would have been surgical butchery on a living target. Multiple Giganotosaurus would rush a prey animal, each taking slashing bites at the legs and flanks, cutting through muscle groups that controlled movement. The prey wouldn't die immediately. It would be crippled, brought to the ground by its own failing body. And then the feeding would begin while it was still breathing. For a human, the experience would be mercifully brief only because of our size. A single bite would likely take your entire torso, the 8-inch teeth punching through ribs and spine, the jaw pressure crushing everything between them into an undifferentiated pulp. You'd be bitten in half, the two pieces of your body hitting the ground separately, your brain struggling to process signals from a body that no longer existed as a connected whole. Death would come from shock within 10 to 15 seconds. But your final moments would be spent looking at your own bisected body, understanding in perfect clarity exactly what had happened. Then there's and here we move from terrestrial nightmares to oceanic apocalypse. Otodus Megalodon swam the world's oceans from 23 million to 3.6 million years ago, and was still finding its teeth in surprising numbers, some as large as a human hand. The shark itself reached lengths of 60 feet and weights approaching 50 tons, but the teeth are what revealed the true horror. They're serrated like steak knives, triangular, and replaced continuously throughout the shark's life. We've found fossilized whale bones with Megalodon bite marks, and the damage is staggering. The entire vertebrae crushed into fragments, ribs sheared clean through, skulls punctured from multiple angles. Bite force estimates range from 24,000 to 40,000 pounds per square inch, which is difficult to contextualize because nothing alive today comes close to that power. The strongest human bite is around 200 psi. A saltwater crocodile is 3,700. Megalodon was operating in a completely different category of force, the kind of pressure used in industrial hydraulic presses. If Megalodon bit a human, you wouldn't experience it as a bite. You'd experience it as instantaneous structural failure. Your body would simply come apart where the teeth touched it, bones exploding into fragments, tissue liquefying under pressure, the water around you turning opaque with your own dissolved remains. Death would be instantaneous, consciousness ending before pain signals could even reach your brain. But the horror is in the scale. Megalodon wouldn't bite once. It would bite repeatedly, reducing your entire body to a dispersing cloud of organic matter in under 5 seconds. And then it would swim away because you wouldn't have represented enough calories to be worth eating. You'd be killed almost accidentally, destroyed not out of hunger but because you were something small that moved and triggered the shark's predatory response. Yet even these apex predators, as devastating as they were, killed as animals, following instinct and biological imperative. But the fossil record holds one predator that seemed to kill with something approaching malice, a creature so perfectly designed for ending life that paleontologists still argue about whether it could have actually existed. In 1995, a fossil hunter in Argentina stumbled across something that made seasoned paleontologists question whether they'd made a classification error. The bones were too large, the proportions too extreme, the evidence too disturbing to fit comfortably into any existing framework of prehistoric predation. When the excavation was complete and the specimen fully documented, the scientific community had to confront an uncomfortable reality. Evolution had created something that existed purely to kill, and it had done so with an efficiency that bordered on overkill. Maposaurus rosei wasn't the biggest theropod ever discovered, but it might have been the most dangerous. And when you examine the fossil site where it was found, you start to understand why some researchers describe it in terms usually reserved for serial killers rather than animals. The Maposaurus site in Patagonia contained the remains of at least 9 individuals of varying ages, all found together in a single bone bed. This wasn't a random accumulation. This was a pack, a hunting group, possibly even a family unit that lived and hunted together. And we know what they hunted because the same site contained the remains of Argentinosaurus, the largest land animal ever to exist, a sauropod weighing up to 100 tons. The Maposaurus individuals weren't just near this carcass, their teeth were embedded in the bones. Bite marks covered the skeleton in patterns that suggest coordinated attack points, different pack members targeting different areas simultaneously. This was organized violence on a scale that's difficult to comprehend. Each Maposaurus measured around 40 feet long and weighed close to 5 tons, with skulls measuring nearly 6 feet and filled with teeth that curved backward like meat hooks. But it's the teeth structure that reveals the true nightmare. They weren't smooth. They were serrated on both edges, front and back, with microscopic blade-like projections that acted like a saw. When Maposaurus bit down and pulled back, the teeth didn't just puncture. They ripped, they tore, they carved channels through flesh that would never close because the serrations destroyed tissue at a microscopic level, preventing any possibility of clotting or healing. Now imagine you're a human in their territory. You wouldn't face one Maposaurus, you'd face the pack, and they wouldn't kill you quickly because quick kills weren't their strategy. They were persistence hunters, bleed-on-track predators that inflicted devastating wounds and then followed their prey until blood loss and exhaustion made it vulnerable. The first bite would probably target your legs, the lead pack member lunging in and taking a massive chunk of your thigh. Those serrated teeth meeting through muscle and femoral artery. You'd feel the impact, the sudden burning cold as teeth punched through skin, and then the pulling sensation as the predator withdrew, taking several pounds of your flesh with it. The pain would hit a second later. Not as a localized sensation but as a full-body system shock. Your brain struggling to process trauma on a scale it never evolved to handle. You'd look down and see the wound, not a clean cut but a ragged crater, where your leg used to be, blood pumping out in rhythm with your heartbeat. And you'd understand with perfect clarity that you were going to die. But not yet. Not for several more minutes. The pack wouldn't press the attack immediately. They'd circle, watching you try to run on a destroyed leg, watching you stumble and fall, watching you try to apply pressure to a wound too massive to compress. And then, when you'd lost enough blood to stop fighting, when your movements became slow and confused from hypovolemic shock, they'd close in. The feeding behavior of large theropods has been extensively studied. Using modern forensic techniques applied to fossilized bite marks, we can tell which bites were made on living tissue versus dead tissue based on the presence or absence of healing indicators and the depth of tooth penetration. The Maposaurus bites on that Argentinosaurus skeleton show clear evidence of feeding on living prey. Bite marks overlap in ways that suggest the animal was moving, trying to escape, while being consumed. Some of the wounds show partial healing, meaning the animal survived long enough after being bitten for its body to begin the repair process, only to be attacked again. For a human victim, this means you'd be aware during the consumption. You'd feel the first bite taking your leg, the second bite taking your shoulder and part of your chest, the third bite opening your abdomen and pulling out internal organs while your heart was still pumping. Modern medical science tells us that humans can remain conscious for up to 90 seconds even after catastrophic blood loss begins. As long as the brain receives some oxygen, those 90 seconds would encompass more horror than most people experience in a lifetime. You'd watch pieces of yourself being torn away. You'd feel the grinding of teeth against your bones. You'd hear the wet sounds of your own body being disassembled, and you'd smell it, the copper temps of blood mixing with the reptilian musk of the predators, the smell of your own opened intestines, the smell of death that was yours. But here's what makes Maposaurus truly disturbing from a paleontological perspective. They didn't need to hunt this way. They were large enough and powerful enough to kill prey outright with crushing bites to the skull or neck. The fact that they instead chose to bleed their prey and consume them alive suggests this method was more successful, which means it had been refined over millions of years of evolution, passed down through countless generations, perfected into an art form of prolonged killing. The fossil record shows Maposaurus existed for approximately 5 million years during the Cretaceous period, which means this hunting strategy worked perfectly for 5 million years of continuous success. They weren't just good at killing. They were the best that evolution had ever produced for pack hunting terrestrial predation. And everything they'd learned about killing was encoded in their behavior patterns at an instinctual level. Yet even Maposaurus wasn't the apex of prehistoric lethality. Even they weren't the most dangerous thing that ever lived. Because while they perfected pack hunting on land, something else was evolving in the oceans. Something so large and so powerful that it killed apex predators as casually as you might swat a mosquito. And when we found its remains, we had to create entirely new categories of predator classification just to describe what it was capable of. The jawbone sat in a museum basement for 40 years before anyone realized what they were looking at. It had been catalogued as a large prehistoric whale, filed away, occasionally photographed for academic papers but never truly examined with modern technology. Then in 2008, a graduate student scanning fossils for a comparative anatomy project ran the jaw through a CT scanner, and the computer model that resulted made her call her professor at 2 in the morning. The professor thought she'd made a calculation error. She hadn't. What they were looking at was Livyatan melvillei, named after the biblical Leviathan and Herman Melville, and it represented something that shouldn't have been biologically possible. A whale that hunted other whales that possessed teeth larger than any predator in history, that generated bite forces so extreme that the physics barely made sense. This wasn't just the deadliest prehistoric predator. This was the final boss of Earth's history, the creature that represented the absolute peak of what evolution could create when it tried to design the perfect killer. Livyatan swam the oceans 13 million years ago, and everything about its anatomy was excessive in ways that seem almost spiteful. 57 feet long, weighing close to 60 tons, with a skull measuring 10 feet. But it's the teeth that revealed the true horror. Each tooth measured 14 inches long, some specimens reaching 17 inches, making them the largest functional teeth of any known animal in Earth's history. They weren't like Megalodon's serrated triangles. They were thick, conical, built like railroad spikes, and there were massive teeth in both the upper and lower jaws, an arrangement that let the animal bite down with interlocking precision. Bite force estimates for Livyatan exceed anything we've calculated for any other creature. Conservative estimates start at 40,000 pounds per square inch. Some biomechanical models suggest forces approaching 60,000 psi, which enters the realm of industrial machinery. At those pressures, bone doesn't break. It explosively disintegrates into fragments. Tissue doesn't tear, it liquefies. The whale wasn't biting in any conventional sense. It was using its jaws as a hydraulic press that happened to be alive. We know what Livyatan hunted because we've found the evidence scattered across ocean floor fossil beds from Peru to Chile. Baleen whale bones showing Livyatan tooth marks, smaller prehistoric whale skulls crushed inward from bite pressure. Most disturbingly, we've found Megalodon teeth with damage consistent with Livyatan bites, suggesting these two apex predators actively fought, and the evidence suggests Livyatan often won. Think about that for a moment. The largest predatory shark in history, an animal that could bite through whale vertebrae, was prey for Livyatan. The power differential is almost incomprehensible. A Megalodon bite could generate perhaps 40,000 psi. Livyatan could match or exceed that. But it also had something Megalodon didn't: intelligence. Sperm whales, the modern descendants of Livyatan, have the largest brains of any animal ever to exist, with highly developed regions associated with problem-solving, social coordination, and strategic thinking. Livyatan had a similar brain structure, possibly even more developed. It wasn't just physically more powerful than anything else in the ocean. It was smarter, it could plan, it could learn, it could remember. For a human encountering Livyatan, death would come with a speed that makes it almost meaningless to describe, but we can try. The whale would have detected you through echolocation long before you saw it. Sound waves painting a perfect three-dimensional image of your body in its brain. It would have understood instantly that you were prey, small and soft and defenseless. The attack would come from below, the standard predation pattern for whales hunting surface prey. You'd see nothing until the moment the water erupted beneath you and those jaws materialized out of the darkness, each tooth larger than your entire forearm, arrayed in rows that formed a cage you were already inside. The jaws would close with mechanical precision, those interlocking teeth meeting through your body at multiple points simultaneously. But here's the thing: you wouldn't feel pain, you wouldn't feel anything. At the pressures involved, you're nervous. The system would simply cease to exist before it could transmit signals. The teeth would punch through you. The jaw pressure would compress your entire body into a space roughly the size of a softball, and your mass would redistribute instantly, some of it squeezed out between the teeth as a pink mist, the rest compacted into an undifferentiated mass that the whale might swallow or might simply discard. Death wouldn't come in seconds, it would come in microseconds, the transition from living human to non-existence happening faster than your brain could process a single thought. You would simply stop being, not killed so much as erased, removed from the physical universe by an application of force so extreme that human specimens across a wide geographic range, suggesting they were highly mobile apex predators that ranged throughout the world's oceans. This wasn't a specialized predator limited to specific environments. This was a generalist superpredator that could thrive anywhere, eating anything it wanted, because nothing could threaten it, nothing could escape it, and nothing could survive an encounter with it. We've found fossilized Livyatan hunting grounds, areas where concentrations of prey animal bones accumulate with characteristic bite marks, and the density of remains suggests feeding frenzies of staggering proportions. These whales weren't eating to survive, they were eating because they could, killing more than they needed because their power made waste irrelevant. Some sites show evidence of multiple Livyatan feeding simultaneously, suggesting they may have had complex social structures, possibly even pod-based cooperative hunting, like modern orcas but scaled up to nightmarish proportions. But Livyatan went extinct roughly 8 million years ago, and here's where the paleontological mystery becomes genuinely unsettling. We don't know why. Climate change is the standard explanation, ocean temperatures shifting, prey populations declining, but the evidence doesn't fully support that. Livyatan was highly adaptable, found in both warm and cool water deposits. Its prey base included dozens of species, and even as some went extinct, others flourished. Something removed Livyatan from the oceans, and we have no clear evidence of what. Some researchers have proposed that Megalodon and Livyatan competed until one drove the other to extinction, and both species disappeared around the same time, lending credence to that theory. But there's another possibility that occasionally surfaces in late-night conversations at paleontology conferences, the kind of speculation that doesn't make it into official papers, but lingers in the discipline's collective consciousness. What if Livyatan didn't go extinct? What if it's simply rare enough now that we haven't found modern specimens? The oceans cover 70% of Earth's surface, and we've explored less than 5% of the deep sea. Depths beyond 3,000 feet are more alien to us than the surface of Mars. We know there are large animals down there because occasionally they surface, dead or dying, species we've never catalogued, physiologies we don't understand. In 2018, partially decomposed whale carcass washed ashore in Indonesia bearing bite marks that marine biologists couldn't identify. The tooth spacing suggested something with a bite radius far larger than any known shark. The depth of the wounds suggested pressures exceeding modern predator capabilities. The pattern of the attack suggested intelligence, strategic feeding rather than frenzied biting. The carcass was photographed but not preserved due to local customs, and the images circulate in marine biology circles as an unsolved mystery. It's probably nothing, almost certainly nothing, But the uncomfortable truth is that we don't know the deep oceans well enough to rule out the survival of animals we think died millions of years ago. And even if Livyatan is truly extinct, its legacy isn't. Everything alive today exists in an ocean that Livyatan ruled for millions of years. Every whale, every shark, every marine predator is descended from species that either avoided Livyatan, survived encounters with it, or evolved specifically to counter its predation. The ocean's entire food web was shaped by this animal's existence. We swim in waters where Livyatan once hunted. We dive in trenches where it may have fed. We explore shipwrecks in areas where fossilized Livyatan teeth have been dredged up by deep-sea mining operations. The proof of its existence surrounds us, written in stone, preserved in museum archives, encoded in the evolutionary history of every marine species. It was real. It killed with a brutality that makes every modern predator look gentle by comparison. And whether it's extinct or merely hidden in the depths we haven't explored, the fact that it existed at all should fundamentally change how we think about what nature is capable of creating. The prehistoric world wasn't just dangerous because animals were bigger. It was dangerous because evolution had more time, more opportunities, more generations to refine killing into an art form. These creatures weren't monsters. They were the logical endpoint of millions of years of predator-prey dynamics, each adaptation pushing lethality higher until something like Livyatan emerged. Perfect, unstoppable, and so efficient at ending life that it transcended the category of animal and became something closer to a natural law. If you'd existed when these creatures ruled the earth, your survival would have depended entirely on luck, on not being in the wrong place at the wrong time, because nothing you could do would save you. Once those jaws closed, or those claws descended, or those teeth found your flesh. But what if I told you there's something even worse waiting in the shadows of history? Something that makes these prehistoric killers look like a warm-up act. Something that didn't just kill humans but learned to hunt us specifically, with a precision that suggests intelligence we still don't fully understand. Click the video on screen right now. Ancient predator that learned to hunt humans. Forensic evidence.